Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grim Flayer, and I hope you're all doing very well today, and I hope even more that you are ready to rock. You didn't think we would let this period of Lurrus domination of Modern pass us by without testing him out in Classic Rock, the BG color pairing Golgari Midrange, the foundation, the rock, upon which this channel was built, and I believe a very, very good home for Lurrus of the Dream Den, an underrated home, one of the best, perhaps, in Modern. We shall see. But that's what we're seeking to do today, and I'm going to tell you why I built the deck the way I did, and some of the reasons why I think Rock is a great home for Lurrus, and also is pretty well positioned here in general. But first, I do have to shout out a few very nice Patreon supporters, my friends. We have a brand new confidant, Alex Gray. Welcome to the fold, my friend. Thank you so very much for your support. And we have count them three, former confidants, all of whom have upgraded to the tireless tier of support. They are David Cordova. I probably got your name wrong again, my friend, but at least I hope it's close this time. We've got Sal Molacola, and we've got Gold Sabertooth. These three guys are all awesome as individuals, I can tell you that for sure. Thank you very, very much, my friends. And speaking of great supporters, if you guys out there, if you want more BGX content, three of my Patreon supporters are doing exactly that for you. I'm going to link their channels in the description below, but we've got Swag Tusk putting out a bit of Jund, we've got Ironworks putting out even more Jund, both of these are in Modern, and we've got the tireless Rocker playing green-black just like this in both Pioneer and Modern. It's been a little while since I shouted out other channels, friends of this channel, so I figured I would give those guys a plug, so please do, my friends, check them out. And now let's talk about Lurrus of the Dream Den in Golgari Midrange. Okay, so a common enough question I've gotten on the channel, you know, in the old days before Ikoria was, why play Rock? Why would you ever play Rock over Jund or over other three-color BGX decks? Well, the answer that you usually give is the painlessness and the consistency of producing green. Also, the utility-rich nature of the mana base. These are all major incentives to playing the Rock, and so literally a better mana base, and the answer is yes. And often that incorporates Field of Ruin, but we're not doing that here because big mana is not so much on the radar, and also the lower curve style of Lurrus with a lower land count, and still a lot of mana sinks, and a lot of things to do every turn if everything is going somewhat your way, means that we cannot as easily accommodate Field of Ruin. So I've cut them, and we are therefore left with one fewer reason to play a Rock, because we're not playing Field of Ruin, so we don't have that edge against big mana. But I will tell you what, Scavenging Ooze. This card is so incredibly well positioned right now. Opposing Lurrus decks are everywhere. Scooz is good against them. Uro is everywhere. If it's a fair deck, it's not playing Lurrus, it's probably playing Uro. Ooze is really good against those decks. And Burn with Lurrus is the deck to beat. It is the #1 deck in the format at the time of this recording, and Scavenging Ooze is very, very good there, both at disrupting the Lurrus plan and generally at stabilizing us against any kind of a traditional Burn progression. So, Scavenging Ooze, very well positioned, and BG Rock, the best home for Scooz, because our mana, again, the green is more plentiful, and it is more painless, and in general, BGX decks are the best homes for Scooz out there. So, this deck is something that I think you should reach for if you want to play Lurrus and you also want to beat Burn. That is what I've set out to do with this. Obviously, we're not punting other matchups either if we can help it. We're trying to compete on all fronts as I usually do, but we do have a little bit of special attention paid to Burn. So what I'm doing a little bit differently, I've got some experimentation going on in the mana base. I see some people playing only 20 lands out there. I don't know how they're getting away with it. I end up having to keep more 1- and 2-landers than I'm comfortable with 22 lands, but maybe it is correct. I think time will tell about that. But I'm playing a couple copies of Marsh Flats, which is a fine card to include anyway, but it also works nicely with Grim Flayer in a couple different ways. I am also playing a Twilight Mire and an Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Now, typically I will only have one or the other, sometimes neither, in my BG the Rock decks, but there's some special incentives here. So, leaning so heavily on Scooz made me want to investigate Twilight Mire. Twilight Mire also facilitates Treetop Village really well, and Twilight Mire is also very bad with Field Field of Ruin, which is out of our deck, so we have a little bit more of a free roll inclusion of a decent land in the form of Twilight Mire. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, it kind of covers the other half of our deck. Urborg is going to work well with Basic Forest, of course, and Treetop Village as well, but also works well with Twilight Mire itself. Also works well with Marsh Flats. You can save the Revolt, or just the Life. If you don't need it, you can operate as though it were a swamp for the most part. And it makes Peatland have painless black mana. So I think if there is a shell where we can play a land base like this, it's going to be this one. Again, a little experimental, but I do like it. Other things that I'm doing that differ from other people's takes on Rock that have seen some prominence are a lot of people are playing for Hexdrinker. Now, I get it. The card's good. And more importantly than it being, like, amazing, it's just, like, good enough to play, and it's a one-drop threat. It's the only really viable one-drop threat in BGX, and obviously that has a lot of incentives to pair with Lurrus, but I still think that I don't want to start with 4. Maybe it'll prove to be optimal, but you know who's been performing really well for me in all of my games that I've played him alongside Lurrus is my namesake. That's right, the Grim Flayer himself. So instead of 4 Hexdrinker, I did opt for a 2-2 split. I think this gives us a different dimension. I think it might be more optimal, but we'll have to see. I'm also main decking a Collective Brutality. You can get more synergy and more upside off of the 2-for-2 or 3-for-3 escalations when you are playing Lurrus, of course. And like I said, I am kind of gunning for burn with this build, so that's why we do that. Despite gunning for burn, we're still playing 4 Dark Confidant and 3 Thoughtseize. These are crucial linchpins of BG the Rock in Modern. I think you have to have a very good reason not to play, you know, mostly maxed out. You're not going to play the 4th Thoughtseize, right? But so 3 Thoughtseize is the virtual max, 4 Dark Confidant the literal max. I think you should just pretty much be on those. And you can make up for their presence in other ways, including the sideboard. When I say make up for it, I mean the fact that they're bad against burn. So moving on to the sideboard, we have some spice. We have 2 copies of Brutality for a total of 3. And I thought about playing the 4th, but I think that Shadow Spear number 1 is definitely better than Collective Brutality number 4. Brutalities are great, but they do reach diminishing returns in multiples, whereas Shadow Spear, as just a one-of, is a perfect complement to them in my opinion. Brutality to disrupt them and slow them down, and then Shadow Spear to stick and run away with the game. Shadow Spear also, gotta remember that Bogles is on the rise because they're another good home for Lurrus. And Bogles can prey upon Jund to some degree, and upon Burn to a large degree. So it's a good shell for Lurrus. It's a good meta deck right now, and Shadow Spear is a great answer to Bogles. Shadow Spear, finally, is also, I think, very, very good against Gruul midrange, which is still out there, and it's still really, really tough for us. Shadow Spear, excellent against Klothys, generically fine against Gruul beyond that, right? So, Nihil Spellbomb, another very well-positioned card, spectacularly well-positioned. 3 in the 75 just seems basically mandatory, if you ask me. 2 copies of Damping Sphere. Some combo decks are out there trying to take advantage of the decks that are trying to grind with Lurrus. They're trying to just combo off. Damping Sphere is good against a lot of those, and we cannot play Fulminator Mage or Ashiok, and we're not playing Field of Ruin, so our 3 best tools, basically, against big mana decks are not in our deck, actually, when we're on Lurrus Rock, so Damping Sphere is going to try to hedge against big mana, which admittedly is not anywhere near as prominent as it was before Ikoria, but still a deck we have to respect. Damping Sphere helps us do that while doing double duty in other matchups. Reign of Tears, of course, is the Fulminator Mage replacement. We cannot play Fulminator alongside Lurrus, and the weakness of Rock is its inability sometimes to keep up on the value with the 3-color decks like Jund and Bant, and now these 4-color Astrolabe piles. Veil of Summer plays in all of those matchups. It's a nice 1-mana, 2-for-1, 1-mana cryptic command, really. So, even though it's not a perfect fit in our deck, even though I hate the card, I think on the Rock especially, we should be playing it. Finally, a couple pieces of spice rounding out the sideboard. Deadweight, kind of the same concept as Seal of Fire. It's not quite as proactive, but it is definitely nice to have a repeatable -2/-2 that also happens to grow the Goyf. And Vampire Hexmage, my own personal spice. It is a repeatable, 2 mana, kill your Planeswalker. Basically, it has other applications that are interesting as well. And just a 2/1 first strike is enough to make up the numbers in some anti-aggro configurations that we'll be looking to reach for post-side. So there you go, my friends. That is my first take. This was my first ever run out with Lurrus Rock, with Catrock, I dare say, if we want to go with that name. I think it's kind of a cool moniker. So this was my first ever run out with Catrock. This was my debut. Thank you once again to the Patreon supporters, especially the ones I mentioned earlier, and without further ado, let's take a look at our replay of the Catrock debut. All right, my friends, starting it off against M. Hayashi. At the time of the playing of this league, and indeed at the time of this recording, M. Hayashi was and is the trophy leader. And if you pay attention to the 5-0 dumps, you might have seen his name alongside some really unusual brews. This guy is always just going to town with the spice. So you can't say enough about the spice with M. Hayashi, and he's representing a fetch land, so we don't bother to bauble him, but we will run out another bauble, play our Treetop Village tapped. We baubled ourselves to see, okay, if we're going to draw a Fatal Push off the top, then we might run out Blooming Marsh, but otherwise, the coast is clear to run out Treetop Village. And on the end step, opponent just bobbling up a Storm, fetching with Bloodstained Mire. We've got 3 Mishra's Bauble triggers on the stack at the beginning of the upkeep of turn 2 of round 1, game 1. And we've got a Lurrus Mirror staring each other down. If that doesn't show you where Modern's at, I don't know what does. We had a 4th trigger to the stack just to say that we did, and opponent's about to draw a Sacred Foundry, so this is no surprise. Again, M. Hayashi, I'm familiar with his often he gets a ton of 5-0s. He's the trophy leader, but his builds are always really off meta or really experimental or just really unique. That's probably the best way to put it. And therefore, with any other Burn player, I'd be like, why didn't they do anything on turn 1 or turn 2 besides play baubles and lands? But with Hayashi, it's like, okay, he's doing something different. So running out Goyf still seems good, even if it's not just pure traditional Burn. It does not die to Bolt, and it's clearly some kind of a Burn variant, but they didn't do anything on turn 2, so we kind of time walk them. So maybe they had a Bolt in hand, I'm not sure. In any case, opponent just runs out a land that we don't know about. We're going to bauble them. We see another mountain on top, but they're probably going to shuffle that away. Sadly for us, despite our repeated redraws off of these baubles and being on the draw, we have not managed to hit the 3rd land. So let's go ahead and attack with the Goyf. An opponent has Path to Exile. That is definitely one of the things that makes sense. Again, main deck Path to Exile in what looks otherwise like a Burn shell. This is definitely some spice. So, but the presence of Path, something that they could reasonably have is another Path. So rather than run out the Grim Flayer, which would die not only to the Path, but to any Burn, I did decide to Thoughtseize, even though obviously Thoughtseize is pretty bad against against most Burn decks. It's still probably the play here. An opponent will respond with a Lightning Bolt and a Lava Dart. Lava Dart, another really off-meta call, a really experimental call, and Thoughtseize is going to whiff. That's kind of a mixed blessing. Of course, we're happy they don't have a handful of Burn, but it does hurt to pay 2 life and waste a mana to just do absolutely nothing, right? So opponent getting to shock in the Sacred Foundry, they ripped a Monastery Swiftspear off the top, which is an incredible draw, because that, of course, allows them to get some prowess value off of the Lurrus into Bauble play that they're about to make, and then they've got Lava Dart waiting in the graveyard. So their stuff's lining up really well against our stuff, but they did have a slow start. They're just really starting to connect here, and it's turn 4. We neglect to block. We're going to make them use the Lava Dart, and indeed they do. I think that's correct because they've got a Sunbaked Canyon coming down the pipe, and they could have future prowess creatures, so I kind of like making them do that for sure. And we've drawn Fatal Push, and that's actually a really good draw because that gives us carte blanche here to go Lurrus, get our own Bauble value going, and we see they're about to draw a Lava Dart, which is unfortunate. It's something that can answer Lurrus, but we will achieve Revolt that way, take care of the opposing Lurrus, which is the first and most important thing that we needed to do to have a chance in this game. Opponent's going to run out Sunbaked Canyon, and again, they have Lava Dart lining up the kill here, but, they're having to Stone Rain themselves for the second time. This is a familiar sight to me as a prowess player, but it is definitely slowing them down a bit. Their other draw for turn was a Rakdos Cackler. This is another piece of Hayashi spice, what can I say? It's a 1/1 with Unleash that therefore comes in usually as a 2/2. Okay, you got it. A bit of a strange one, of course, and we are on the ropes. We do go down to 7, but we have some decent cards in hand, and Grim Flayer is now a 4/4, which is pretty sweet. So I decide it's better to hold up Trophy than to do anything else here. Opponent on the unstep will crack Canyon, and yeah, they've Stone Rain themselves for the 3rd time. They're getting a lot of value off of this stuff, of course, but opponent will play Seal of Fire and then Path to Exile. So their finds have been pretty incredible, you have to say. We will Trophy the Swifty, but we have to pay a life to do so, and we lose our blocker, and the Cackler is going to put us to 4. With that Seal of Fire, we are at a virtual 2. And then the opponent deploys their final land. So we're at basically 2, and they are hellbent. So we're obviously dead to any burn, including Seal of Fire. But we've drawn Tarmogoyf. Now, Tarmogoyf is a pretty good draw, because obviously we need to race them as hard as possible. Step 1, don't die. Step 2, race them. So we play Goyf and Flayer and say go. Opponent rips another Rakdos Cackler off the top. Well, it's something. It's action, but it's giving us a shot, and we rip Maelstrom Pulse. What a lovely sight. What a beautiful, beautiful draw. You love to see it. So pulse away the Cacklers. Opponent, yeah, could have done an interesting play of Seal of Fire to protect one of them, but it's definitely got to be better to just keep the fire around and make us dead to any burn, right? And then we'll connect with Flayer and with Goyf. We see 3 cards we don't really want. The only halfway decent one there is Fatal Push, but of course, we already have a piece of removal in hand. So we're not dead to a creature, we are only dead to a burn spell. Well, opponent kind of has potentially both. They rip Abbot of Carol Keep, which is another just mega spicy card. When it's a 2/1 with Prowess, ETB exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So if they flip Burn, we die. If they don't, they die. And they flip Mountain, so that is going to be game. They play the Mountain. We could just Trophy and end it there, but we have a little bit more of a stylish way to do things. Why not? We crack Peatland, then we untap and we push. We're sending in with a Treetop Village too if we feel like it. We've got overwhelmingly lethal, my friends. So we take down M. Hayashi's, burn hybrid deck. It's kind of like mid-range burn is basically what I would call it. I don't really know, but again, he's the trophy leader. He does all kinds of off-the-wall stuff. This is one of them, but we did take him down, and they had a lot of reactive play and a lot of underwhelming stuff, like their Cackler is getting outsized by Goyf and Flayer. So we still finished the game at 4. You gotta figure that a traditional burn deck might have taken that game 1 off of us. But then again, maybe our creatures stick without those paths to exile and get us over the line too. I don't know. In any case, that was an that was an interesting game 1. Let's take a look at game 2. Alright, my friends, so game 2 will be on the draw, and we have 7 bad cards to bring out. It's 4 Bob, 3 Thoughtseize. Well, do we have 7 good cards to bring in? We pretty much do. So, 2 Nihil Spellbomb, not normally something you'd be excited about against Burn, but I think it's very good against Lurrus Burn. And, of course, 2 copies of Brutality, 1 copy of Shadow Spear. These things are all excellent against any variation of Burn under the sun. We have 2 more cards to bring in, and they were dead weight, which is totally fine removal. Only bad thing about it is it's not instant speed, but it's definitely really, really strong otherwise. And a Vampire Hexmage, which is just a 2/1 first strike body that actually lines up pretty well if you think about it against a Burn Lurrus deck. So, definitely better than Bob, right? Definitely better than Bob. Opponent will start us off here. And they have mulliganed down to 6. But they have found turn 1 pressure in the form of a Soulscar Mage. So again, you see the kind of the hybrid nature of the deck kicking in. We're going to play a Bauble and Bauble them. We see they're about to draw this Bloodstained Mire. And then, of course, it's going to be Fatal Push time on the Soulscar Mage. Opponent will follow up with a Core Firewalker. Now, this is another M. Hayashi head scratcher. I don't know if they thought we were Jund. I think we pretty clearly were just straight green-black rock, so I don't know why they would bring in Core Firewalker necessarily. Maybe they just wanted to up their threat density. It's a synergistic card in the deck. It's going to gain them some life. They have like double triggers off of Lava Dart potentially. It's a healthy 2-drop to buy back with Lurrus if the game goes long. Still a little bit surprised to see it in the deck. Like, what in their main deck is worse than Core Firewalker, though? That was what I was wondering. In any case, we've drawn Inquisition. Let's lead on that. We see Path to Exile and Swifty. I felt obligated to take the Path, even though this is going to let them get a good, clean hit in, because, of course, we want the option of going Lurrus and looping Bauble and being able to race them if they can't answer, right? So opponent will play Mire into Swifty, and we, of course, run out our Spellbomb there as well, and then we get hit for 3. Back to us, it's an Inquisition. I don't really think I'm going to cast that. It's almost certainly going to whiff. The only thing that would be a good hit that I can think of is like another Path to Exile, so we're just going to make him have it. We're going to run out the Lurrus. We're going to get our Bauble. It's going to be great. End step, opponent will fetch and crack Sunbait Canyon, so they're digging. This is a great time to Bauble. In response to the Canyon, we're going to see what they're going to draw. And once again, it's a Lava Dart. Lava Dart is the card that they keep finding to kill our things. And again, it's kind of a mixed bag for them. We're happy that they have to Stone Rain themselves again, after already Stone Raining themselves with a Sunbait Canyon, just to kill our 3-for-1, right? That said, they are on the play with a lot of pressure, so it's still more than worthwhile for them. And they found another Core Firewalker, so sure, the Grizzly Bears, the life-gaming Grizzly Bears are coming after us. Lava Dart takes care of Lurrus and is back to us. We've got Maelstrom Pulse waiting in the wings yet again, and we've drawn Grim Flayer. So Flayer is actually kind of appealing, but we are going to Bauble first, and this is why Mishra's Bauble, my friends, is so, so good. I might have just said, let's play the tapped land, let's get a Flayer down, he's a 4-4, and we'll pass holding up Nihil Spellbomb. But we know the opponent's about to draw a Path to Exile, which makes playing Grim Flayer way, way worse. And also, we can definitely answer the path next turn with this Inquisition, so instead, we just pulse away the Core Firewalkers, which is much better in the face of a Path to Exile, and we're still holding up Nihil Spellbomb this way. We know exactly what their hand is going to be. We know that Shocking In obviously kind of sucks, but is still relatively free because we're only getting hit for 1 this turn, and we just want to be as efficient as possible with our turn. And we've seen a ton of new cards sequencing this way. Of course, we do lead on the Inquisition to take away that Path to Exile, leaving the opponent totally hellbent with a mere 1-2 on board, and a Lurrus that they cannot cast waiting in the wings. We will Bauble, and we see they have a Lightning Bolt coming off the top, which is a little bit scary. So whatever we play is liable to trade 2-for-1 with their Swifty plus their Bolt. You could go either way. You could have the Flayer take the trade or have the Goyf take the trade. It's kind of 6-1, half dozen of the other, if you ask me. Goyf has the potential to be a little bit bigger, so I opted to have the Flayer go get the 2-for-1 here for us, but again, I think you can make arguments in either direction. In any case, opponent does indeed take that line, and you can see, once again, our information off Mishra's Bauble has been so nice this game, but not as nice as top-decking Scavenging Ooze. So we just casually top-deck a Scooze. We had a lot of other things going our way, but Scooze becoming a 4-4, and again, leaving the opponent hell-bent with only 2 lands is incredible. That's obviously very, very good. They do draw the 3rd land, so now they get to run out Lurrus, but there's no Bauble to buy back. So it is back over to us, and we've got some really good stuff in hand. Verdant Catacombs, not the best draw I've ever seen. However, Assassin's Trophy away the Lurrus seems really good. Play a Tarmogoyf seems really good. Gain another life, become a 5-5 seems really good. And holding up Nihil Spellbomb or another Scooze activation seems really good. So, back to OP, and they top deck Soulscar Mage. They show us the card, then they scoop it on up. So, we had an absolutely dominant display there in Game 2. And we didn't even really draw sideboard cards, did we? I think our only life gain came in the form of Scavenging Ooze. We didn't cast Brutality. We didn't cast Shadow Spear. We were just kind of utilizing the Bauble for not only value alongside Lurrus and to see more cards and help us curve out more efficiently, but also to inform our decisions. Again, the Bauble information this game was so huge I cannot even explain it. And then the classic green-black rock core did all the heavy lifting. Fatal Push, Inquisition of Kozilek, Maelstrom Pulse, getting our second 2-for-1 of the match, which is a pretty unusual against Burn. But again, we're against a pretty unusual version of it. And, of course, Goyf and Scooze slamming the door. So there you go, my friends. What a strong start, taking down M. Hayashi cleanly here on his spicy, spicy brew. And we will go on to round 2. Alright, my friends, here in round 2 we have a very balanced hand. It's got a little bit of everything. There's nothing that we lack for. We have Hand Disruption, and we have Removal, and we have Brutality, which can be both, or either, as the case may be. And we have a Hexdrinker and a Bob, and we have 2 lands. So it's a really good blind game 1 hand. We'll have to see what the opponent is up to. Opponent won the die roll, mulligan to 6, and wouldn't you know it, what a shocker, it is another Lurrus Mirror, and it's a Sacred Foundry Lurrus Mirror, no less. So opponent will begin on Goblin Guide. This is, we assume, a more traditional burn deck. Not everyone is doing the M. Hayashi experimentation. And Goblin Guide was kind enough to find us a Blooming Marsh, which is our best land in the matchup, so thank you, Goblin Guide. Now, we could play Hexdrinker, and I think that's fine. I think that's very reasonable, but I also think that this is actually a really good spot for a Thoughtseize. There are a few things I'm afraid of, and I also want perfect information for our Brutality next turn, and we see Lava Spike, Skewer the Critics, Eidolon. So my first instinct was just to take away Eidolon, but if we do that, the opponent just domes us for 8 next turn, and our Brutality may or may not hit. So I actually said, I'm cool with you casting Eidolon, and I know that you will, and therefore will take away one of the burn spells. And unfortunately, that does mean the Goblin Guide's going to get to live, but it's something that we can handle. It's something that can get us value. It did not that time. It revealed a Bob. And Bob is actually a pretty fine card to have drawn for turn here, simply because we're looking to pitch some bad stuff and fully escalated Brutality. So we kill Eidolon. We see that the opponent has drawn another Lava Spike variant. And, so they're hitting some good top decks, you have to say. And they had the play, they had the turn 1 guide flipping us a land this time, going back to doing his job, and they drew another Lava Spike, so opponent literally drawing nothing but deal 3s, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. Therefore, despite having a turn 2 Brutality, we're at 6 life by the time we go to our turn 3. It's pretty crazy. Turn 1 discard, turn 2 Brutality, we're still at 6. So, we gotta run out the Hexdrinker now, and we'll put a level on. Of course, we are representing Fatal Push pretty hard this way, but that's just the right play to make. And opponent will Goblin Guide, will Fatal Push. Guide does not give us a land. Opponent has hit the 3rd land, so no Bauble. We've been lucky enough to fade the Baubles from these Lurrus decks so far, for the most part, but they do get the free 8th card. So we have drawn another copy of Fatal Push, and we are going to simply decay the Lurrus, play the Hexdrinker. Fatal Push, not the best draw. We didn't lack for removal there. I would love to have found something else, but we got the Hexdrinker at level 4, and that's actually pretty important. So we put them to 7. Back to the opponent will pass. So we are dead to double burn, but we are not dead to anything else because we have a handful of removals. So it really doesn't matter what we do here. We can put some levels on Hexdrinker, still hold up some removal, or we can hold up all of our removal, or we can play Lurrus and hold up Fatal Push, or play Lurrus and not hold up Fatal Push. It literally does not matter what we do here, especially game 1. The opponent will either draw a double burn spell and kill us, or they will not, and we will kill them. So, that's what's going on here. We put them down to 3, and then, we're here to play Lurrus, so we give Lurrus a run out. But again, like I said, it really doesn't matter what we do. Opponent found a Lightning Bolt, so they bolt us, we're at 3. Again, dead to burn, not dead to anything else, and the opponent found Blood-Stained Mire, so a super close game. The only reason I think we won that is because of our main deck Collective Brutality, so we are rewarded, my friends. We are rewarded for teching against Burn, for targeting Burn. It is the deck to beat, and so far we are doing so. Just like against the Hayashi version, we will get much better post-side. We're going to side the exact same way, despite the decks being different in structure. Still the overall same incentives, and I will see you for game 2. Alright, my friends, so our hand's a little bit sparse on action, but it's totally reasonable. It's a definite keep. We've got Inquisition and Brutality, that's awesome, and even Spellbomb is awesome in this matchup. Opponent, once again, mulligans as well, but once again, they have the play and they have turn 1 Goblin Guide. So, Guide not showing us any lands here. You love to get free value off of Goblin Guide when you're lining up a Collective Brutality. There's just not much that feels better than that. We've drawn Scavenging Ooze. That is a good find. And then we Inquisition, and the opponent will bauble us in response, and then we see Eidolon of the Great Revel, Boros Charm. So this was actually a really interesting spot and a really fateful decision. My first instinct was to do what served us well last game and take away the Boros Charm and allow them to play Eidolon and plan to beat it with Collective Brutality, but for a couple of different reasons, I didn't quite like that as much, partially because I'm thinking we have a higher ceiling. We have a higher ceiling if we take away the if we take away the Eidolon and they draw a burn spell next turn. And if they don't draw a burn spell or something else like a Path to Exile, it probably means that they either drew a creature, which they'll play, and then we can still get the Boros Charm, or it means they drew a land and they whiffed, and then we are in pole position to win. But you could definitely make an argument that taking away Boros Charm is safer here. However, I talked myself into taking the Eidolon, and remember that they're also seeing the Bauble draw here too, right? So that makes our Brutality line, I think, better on average. And that's a big reason why we went for it. So we've drawn Grim Flayer, which is a fine card to pitch just because we can eventually get it back with Lurrus, or it's food for Skoos, and we go indeed on the Brutality play, on the Brutality line, and then opponent will Boros Charm us in response, and both of their top decks were lands. So we get max punished for choosing the Brutality line instead of doing something else, whether it be playing Spellbomb to try to compete over Lurrus, or maybe running out Grim Flayer, I don't know. Either way, we get maximum punished, we get really blown out, and it's not often that you're like, oh darn, Burn drew 2 lands instead of a spell in a land, right? But it's actually really bad in the face of them being on the play, it wasn't necessarily even clear that they would hit the 3rd land for Lurrus, which is part of why I didn't necessarily think I was 100% priced into the other line. But we get max punish here, for sure. I think, honestly, a few different lines there are justifiable. I don't think ours was strictly wrong, but ours was certainly maximum punished. So they're on the Lurrus plan. And here I decided to kind of double down on my earlier action. I decided to just gain a life, play around Seal of Fire. You could definitely argue for playing around Lurrus more, but at this point I'm just going to try to outsize them and see if they can beat us this way. Especially because the opponent, we know that their 3rd land in hand, their 3rd unknown, was in fact an Inspiring Vantage. So we knew that they just had 2 lands in hand, and we wanted to make them simply top deck 1 time a way to beat the Skoos. If they can't, I still think our position is pretty good. But once again, we do get maximum punished because the opponent has another Mishra's Bauble in hand for turn, after the Lightning Helix, and then they get to play Goblin Guide as well. So there's a whole lot of bad stuff going on. This is the type of progression where I kind of think they had us almost no matter what. Again, the second Bauble makes it so competing over the first one with Skoos wouldn't really have changed anything. I think they just kind of have everything here. We're drawing pretty well too, though. You have to say we're drawing pretty well. Scavenging Ooze number 2 is the find. Now I'm going to start trying to compete over the Baubles, maybe encourage them to attack with the Lurrus, and that's a fine enough trade, but it's all pretty bad. We could have done the same thing as we did before too, and just made ourselves a 4/4, but at this point we're already down to 9, so the Lurrus just looping the Bauble, I don't know, seemed like an easy way for us to just lose to repeated burn. And again, the opponent just kind of lacks for nothing here. They found a Swifty too, which is a great find. Goblin Guide not showing us any love this game, so I do just take the trade on Lurrus. We kind of got punished at every turn here. I know I've said that a few times, but I think it is definitely true. So we'll play out Nihil Spellbomb. We'll crack it. We're looking for more action right here, right now, and of course, we found it. Hexdrinker. Definitely rewarding us for the aggressive crack of Nihil Spellbomb because, of course, it is something we can do off Basic Forest. But we are still very, very much on the ropes here. And the opponent tapping, untapping, retapping. I think this other think both of these lands are out of their hand, or at least the canyon is. They found a Skewer the Critics, so that sucks. We go to 3. Opponent moves to attacks. Goblin Guide, still no love off the trigger, man. Still no love from the GG, from the Goblin Guide himself. But we'll assign the block, then we'll push, so we stay alive. And then the opponent plays Inspiring Vantage, and we draw a dead Maelstrom Pulse. So, it's Lurrus into Hexdrinker, which is better at this stage than Nihil Spellbomb, and we just have to fade Burn for a million turns, but we don't even fade it for 1 turn. They rip Lightning Bolt off the top. That's going to be game. So again, that turn 2 decision, I think ours was one of 2 or 3 valid lines, and we got absolutely as punished as you could possibly get for it. I don't think that means it's strictly wrong, but you could definitely debate that one, and I think we would have... It's not up for debate that we would definitely have been in a better position if we had done like we did in Game 1, take away the Boros Charm, they'll play Eidolon T2, we will have to Brutality the Eidolon, but then they still kind of get to go off with Lurrus. And if we took the Eidolon and then played out Nihil Spellbomb to play around their Lurrus and just let them, like we just don't really interact with their board that much, we're just letting them hit us with the Goblin Guide, then we would have competed over the first Lurrus Bauble and they would have instantly drawn another, which is what they did here. So I genuinely think that any of the 3 valid lines would have resulted in us losing pretty horribly, especially when you consider even if we did a little bit better here, it was still 24-0, and we just had a Maelstrom Pulse in hand. Wasn't really gonna do it, now wasn't, my friends. So that was a really tough burn progression to handle. What are you going to do? Let's go to Game 3, see how we do in the, what is it called? In the rubber match. That's what it's called. In the rubber match. Game 3 coming up right now. We got the play here, my friends, and it is another Collective Brutality hand. We have seen no shortage of those, and that is a beautiful thing. Opponent will keep 7 as well, so we open on Inquisition, and they have kind of a perfectly balanced burn hand. It just lacks a creature, but 4 spells, 3 lands, with one of the 3 being a canopy land, is pretty much the platonic ideal of a burn hand. They've just got 3 variants of Lightning Bolt, so we'll take the best one, which is Bolt itself. It's going to grow a hypothetical Goyf more than the others, and it's also just their most flexible card. Back to the opponent. They will go Mountain into Bauble, and then they will suspend a Rift Bolt and say go. Back to us, and hey, we do draw the proverbial Tarmogoyf. It is no longer proverbial, it is now a literal Tarmogoyf, and it will survive many things, so we just play it out. I think better than Brutality there, and I accidentally hit next turn, so let's review what the opponent did there. Opponent went Mishra's Bauble, and number 2. They played out Sunbaked Canyon, and then they suspended 2 copies of Rift Bolt. So quite the turn for the opponent. And back over to us. I guess their hand is Skewer the Critic's Bloodstained Mire, if I'm not mistaken. But again, that went by a little quickly for my tastes, right? So we've drawn yet another land. Makes it pretty easy decision here to go on the Collective Brutality plan. And I'm sorry, they do have 3 cards in hand. That was their hand, plus they drew a Rift Bolt off of Mishra's Bauble. So again, opponent just drawing nothing but deal 3s. Just drawing nothing but deal 3s. And I decided to take away Rift Bolt. So the most obvious thing to do is take away Skewer there, actually, because they're going to probably point the Rift Bolts upstairs. And then Skewer is going to be a 1-mana deal 3. But we know that they can just have a 3-mana deal 3 if they want to. And it got me thinking, what are the odds? Because we're still at 17, and we have a Tarmogoyf on the field. This is a position where we can realistically race them. So it got me thinking, what if the opponent goes Rift Bolt, the Goyf? That, I thought, was not beyond the realm of possibility. Therefore, I decided to make their decisions a little bit more complicated. If that was on their radar, it now becomes more of an interesting decision. Do we go upstairs or do we double bolt the Goyf? But if they double bolt the Goyf, then Skewer the Critics is not going to be a 1-mana spell, which could complicate their decision-making depending on what they drew. So I hope I didn't belabor the point there, or I hope I wasn't too unclear with that thinking, but maybe it was just overthinking because the opponent just domes us with all 3 spells and we go to 8, and they have 1 unknown in hand. So, even though going from 8 to 7 is not insignificant, because of Boros Charm plus Lightning Bolt means you're dead, I still think Fetching there's got to be correct. We got to put our faith in the ability to do something good this turn, and we have. We've drawn Tarmogoyf. So drawing Tarmogoyf is actually just letting us race even harder than we already were. So we play out this Goyf, and now we actually have lethal on field because the opponent is at 9, but they're at a virtual 8 or lower. Between this fetch land and the Sunbaked Canyon, there's just no way they can do anything, really, that beats us without losing life. So we have lethal on field for all intents and purposes, but the opponent had a lightning bolt for turn, so we're at 4, we are dead to Boros Charm, and we have lethal otherwise. We might not always have lethal no matter what they draw. They could have Path to Exile, right? That would be an interesting decision for them. But they play Lurrus here, and Lurrus into Bauble, obviously very, very good. But it's not good enough to beat us, because we have the kill spell in hand. Maelstrom Pulse, once again acting as a really useful kill spell against Burn. But we'll crack the Peatland, just styling on them like we did in round 1. And speaking of style points, dead weight. We got to get dead weight in on the action, so yeah, we'll make Lurrus into some dead weight, and then we send in the Goyfs that will be even bigger with an enchantment in the graveyard for lethal on turn 5. So there we go, my friends. Like I said, we came to beat Burn, and we have done so. We've beaten M. Hayashi's more experimental Burn that gets him all the trophies, and we have beaten a more traditional Burn deck as well, and a lot of it is just, again, how naturally well Green-Black Rock lines up against it, especially when you are respecting the matchup. So there we go, guys. A strong start to our league. I will see you for round 3. We're losing the die roll yet again here, my friends, and it's another companion match, but it is not a Lurrus Mirror. We are against Jegantha, the Wellspring. So change of pace here. We know it's not Burn. Opponent goes Breeding Pool, Sleight of Hand. So I admit to not knowing exactly what they were up to based on that opening, but we do have a Thoughtseize. We've been opening on a lot of discard, which is great. We've been keeping functional hands with discard, which is just where we want to be, and that's what makes the deck tick. So we will indeed Thoughtseize the opponent, and we see that we are against Storm. So Sleight of Hand is a red flag for Storm, obviously. That and Ad Nauseam are the only two meta decks that play it, but Breeding Pool is not that common of an opener with Storm, and you can see why. They have another Breeding Pool in hand, and most of their hand is completely uncastable because they don't have red mana, so we should take either Serum Visions or Monomorphose. It was a really interesting call. I did decide to take away the Monomorphose because it is a mana fixer and also a very scary part of their go-off turns. Taking Serum Visions would just be like planning to mana screw them forever. Taking Monomorphose helps to mana screw them if they don't find a red land off of Serum Visions, and also attacks their mid to late game power. So that's why I kind of took that middle road. Obviously, under many circumstances, you just take Gifts Ungiven. There's 2 rituals, so you probably wouldn't take those, but with a 2-lander, you should at least consider attacking the rituals too. So there's lots and lots of incentives there to do almost anything, but I explained why we took Monomorphose. Opponent, I remember going bottom with the Serum Visions, and then they play out another Breeding Pool. So our plan so far so good, and I definitely want to run out Brutality here. And we see they have drawn Grape Shot and another Monomorphose, so at this point we're just doubling down on our initial plan. We take away another Monomorphose, and we say go. So opponent is blindly top-decking. Again, they went bot, and they unfortunately top-deck their red lands, so we don't get to fully mana-screw them, but we have still taken away some pretty strong spells from them, and I'm a little surprised to see them not shock that in. I guess they're just playing really conservatively with their life total, but they're basically daring us to have another Thoughtseize, right? Because if we had another Thoughtseize, and they had shocked this in, they could at least go Ritual Gifts in response. Now they can't, but we don't have the second Thoughtseize of the game. So instead we just play out Scavenging Ooze. And Scooze is a very good Game 1 card against Storm, and it's going to pressure them and attack their graveyard, of course. And we know all 4 cards in their hand because they just keep drawing lands. And this time they shock in because they're going to do a value gifts on the end step, and they're going to still keep a full hand afterwards. So we are just going to go on the Scooze plan, try to draw more discard or a really proactive threat. Dark Confidant is a pretty proactive threat, but in this exact spot, With them about to gifts and then untap, I wanted to hold Bob for two reasons. Number one, I think if we leave all 4 Scooze activations open, they can't just go for a normal gifts pile of like a couple bears and like get Past in Flames and whatever else. I think this is going to price them into something more unusual, or at least I hope it might. And also, we know they have Grape Shot in hand, so we know that they can put together some kind of a turn, or they can just straight up Grape Shot the Bob. Either way, the Bob is going to die. So if we had a Tarmogoyf, I probably would have run it out. Dark Confidant, again, a fine card in the matchup, but in this exact spot, I thought it was better to hold up all of our Scooze activations. And we're also holding up Fatal Push this way, remember that. We might have to push and activate in the same turn. So, opponent with the gifts, and they show us, as I mentioned, an unusual pile. So they have another Gifts Ungiven, and a Peer Through Depths, which is just going to help them keep digging, then Desperate Ritual and Snow-Covered Island. So, I thought it was a pretty clear decision here to take away the action cards. We take away gifts, we take away Peer, and we give them the 5th land, which is not ideal ever, especially because you gotta remember they have Jegantha, but thankfully we do actually have Assassin's Trophy being decent in the matchup for once. Usually giving them a land to interact with something is a bit of a disaster, right? But hey, Push, Decay, cannot kill Jegantha. Trophy can, right? Again, we give them a land, which kind of sucks, but that's almost beyond the point of mattering. They had 5 lands and a bunch of rituals already, right? So that gifts us out of their hand, so there's 1 unknown. So end step, we trophy Jegantha. We're going to get bigger and then keep attacking their graveyard. Then we're flooding. We're just flooding. So we just finally play out the Bob. We keep leaning really, really heavily on the Scooze. That's basically where we're at. I'm slow rolling Lurrus, again, because Scavenging Ooze, activations, Fatal Push cast, these things are really impactful right now. And if they decide they have to Grape Shot the board away, we can rebuild with Lurrus, right? So there's no real need to yet. Opponent drew another land. So again, end step, we're just going to go crazy with the Ooze. Take away all their graveyard value that matters in the order that it does matter. We're seeing 2 cards per turn with Bob, but unfortunately we cannot draw any action. We draw land, Mishra's Bauble. And we're going to Bauble the opponent, and we see Empty the Warrens is on the top, which is pretty darn scary. So let's ship in here. And Empty is definitely going to be a big part of a go-off turn, but there's not really a whole lot we can do about it. So let's go ahead and run out the Lurrus. We just got to take actions here while we can, and then get the Bauble back. And this way we are giving ourselves as many looks as possible at Maelstrom Pulse, because we know they're going to Grape Shot and Empty this upcoming turn, and we know that Maelstrom Pulse is our best out to a huge Empty the Warrens, especially game 1. Sure enough, opponent will go ham here. Ritual into Ritual. They're going to do some splicing onto Arcane, which is a very strange mechanic from Kamigawa block that doesn't come up often in Modern, but when it does, it's usually in this deck. And then here's a big Grape Shot. Now, I remember not being sure that they did this optimally. They just kind of dome us and then kill Lurrus. I know you got to kill Lurrus. I think you might want to kill Scavenging Ooze there too, but I'm not sure. I'm not a Storm player, so just remember kind of wondering about that at the time. But in any case, opponent will indeed go Hellbent to hit us for, I think, 4 damage, kill our Lurrus, and make a casual 14 goblins. Seems pretty good, my friends. Whoa, I skipped through the turn. What are we doing? Okay, we just skipped through their end step. So what we did was we bobbled them. We saw they're about to draw Monomorphos. That kind of conceals information from us. Well, we're going to gain some life with the Scooze, and we are going to untap and see if we can draw Maelstrom Pulse, or otherwise somehow miraculously survive that Empty the Warrens. First step, Bob flips painlessly. That's pretty good. Second step, we draw off Bauble. Fatal Push, Dark Confidant, Blooming Marsh are the cards we've seen for turn. This is all some pretty underwhelming stuff, but if you take the time to do the math, we actually are not dead on board. So the first thing I decided to do was Bauble myself to see what I'm going to draw. Unfortunately, it's another Overgrown Tomb, so no real help forthcoming. So, One interesting play was to run out Verdant Catacombs and attack with Scavenging Ooze, and if they don't block, then we actually could have lethal. We can push both of our Bobs and eat both of them and do exactly 6. But I thought about that one for a while, and then I said, you know what? I think they're going to block basically no matter what. Like, why wouldn't you with 14 goblins take a block? If not, even if that's not on their radar, they could just die to Collective Brutality Drain. So with that in mind, I was like, well, the attack is kind of free. Yeah, staying back is kind of free too, but I think the attack is kind of free, because again, there's no way they're not going to block. And we draw our Overgrown Tomb off Bauble, the opponent's going to draw their Monomorphos, and we are not dead on board, and they go straight to attacks here, without doing anything with the Monomorphos first, just to kind of test the water, see what we have. They end up leaving one Goblin back. Interesting play. Makes some sense, because they've got to figure the one life is probably not the difference maker. But anyway, time to trade off some Dark Confidants with some Goblin tokens. So we'll do that first, and then after blocks have been assigned, we will push before damage, killing a couple Goblins. Then we'll let damage resolve. We will go to 2, and then before we give them priority again, we will gain a life with Scooz, eating one of our Fallen Confidants, going back up to 3. Second main phase, opponent will fire off that Monomorphos, and they find a Spire Bluff Canal off of it. So, for the second time this league, my friends, Assassin's Trophy is a relevant spell. We trophy away the one Goblin token that hung back, and we steal game 1 off of Storm. That was a really weird game, a really interesting game. Obviously, it was about as close as it gets. Scavenging Ooze, against many Storm progressions, would have really hosed them by repeatedly eating from their graveyard, but they ended up finding Grape Shot and Empty the Warrens, nothing related to Past in Flames. So the Graveyard Disruption ended up not being that relevant in terms of attacking their ability to go off with the traditional means, but Scooz as a early pressure that eventually got to be pretty big, exactly big enough to present lethal on the end step, and also gaining us some crucial points of life. Scooz was still very, very crucial to our victory here, but everything playing a part, we're scraping together a win off of Bob chumping or trading with Goblin tokens, Fatal pushing and Assassin's Trophy and Goblin tokens. It was all pretty ugly, but every Bauble activation gave us that one card deeper that let us put together a stand here at the end. So, a really intense win game 1 against Storm. This is another matchup like Burn that is going to get better for us post-side. Let's take a look at how we sided for game 2. Okay, my friends, so some interesting hedged sideboarding here. You saw that even in game 1, they did not have that much graveyard dependence. They're more than capable of killing us without the graveyard, so I don't think, in light of that, that's only going to increase post-side, by the way, so I don't think we need all 3 Nihil Spellbombs. I only brought in 1. I think 2 copies total in the 60 is sufficient, so we bring in 1 Nihil Spellbomb. We also bring in, of course, 2 copies of Collective Brutality. That's just a great card in the matchup. And, finally, 2 copies of Damping Sphere. That's not a card I usually register, so I've never really gotten to bring it in against Storm, because on the rare occasions it's in my deck, it's just a one-of, and I don't really run into Storm that often. But Damping Sphere, very, very good against Storm, to be honest, so that card's in. In terms of what comes out, 3 copies of Trophy. Sometimes you need to hit Aria Flame with it, but we do play 2 Abrupt Decay and a Maelstrom Pulse and all the discard. Discard both being able to take Aria out of the hand and also just generally depleting their resources, making Aria less scary. But it's still one of their scariest cards. So between Aria and Jegantha, you could leave 1 to 2 trophies in, even though they suck in most circumstances, depending on your build. But our particular build has so much to do that I cut all 3. And I'm also cutting a Grim Flayer and a Dark Confidant. These cards are perfectly fine in the matchup, but on the draw, the more fragile threats, I felt I needed to cut those and just play all the interaction and all the hate possible. And again, we're leaving out some good cards. Bob's good. Flayer's good, Spellbomb's good. Honestly, Shadow Spear's not bad at winning the race against tokens. Vampire Hexmage taking counters off Aria and being a clock. Deadweight can kill a Goblin Electromancer. You wouldn't play most of these, but you could play a lot of them. That's the point here. And we have a good problem. We have a good problem on our hands. We got too much to do. That's what we like to be in any matchup. But in any case, opponent will keep 7, lead on an island, and say go. Back to us, and we will lead on a swamp and go Mishra's Bauble, and then of course we're going to Bauble the opponent here, and we see Veil of Summer on the top of their deck. Well, that's a bad one. Good to know it's coming, and we will Inquisition now because they're not representing green, and it's not in their hand yet. 2 good reasons to get our Inquisition in right now, and opponent will opt in response, which is just a very beautiful thing. They put the Veil of Summer directly into their hand for us, where we see that they also have a 1-lander. So what do we do here? Well, we got another Brutality coming down the pipeline. We've got Fatal Push for the mid-game if they hit a land drop into Bear. Both of these things get blown out hard by Veil of Summer, and Veil of Summer can just cantrip at some point, so I think we're priced into taking it, and of course we are just kind of hoping that they don't draw the second land, especially a red one, anytime soon. Our Bauble trigger will resolve, showing us another Inquisition. We are rewarded for taking Veil, and the opponent does not make a land drop. So once again, we have free reign to cast a discard spell. I'm going to choose to Inquisition here so we can get Treetop Village down, and then start doing more proactive things next turn. The opponent has drawn a second Lightning Bolt, so we kind of have 2 options here. We can take 1 Lightning Bolt, but if we do, then we are kind of priced into taking the other Lightning Bolt with our Brutality, because that means we're just committing to sticking our Hexdrinker. I think that's okay, but I also think that given their fail rate, we already have free win potential from them just not hitting another land anytime soon, so if they hit the second land and they're 1-for-1ing us with bolts, I think that's okay. We are the Lurrus deck, we are the grindy deck, I think that's okay, so I opted for a different course of action. So taking Ritual when they're mana screwed is okay, but again, I think we have bigger fish to fry. So I think if we abandon the Bolt plan, we should take either Monomorphose or Aria of Flame. Either one seems reasonable to me. Monomorphose has the higher free win potential, but Aria of Flame is a very scary card too. And remember that if they do top deck a red land and we don't take Aria, they can go land, Ritual, turn, Aria off of 2 land, and then we're in big trouble from there. We don't have an answer to it. So I did just take the Aria of Flame. But all of that is much ado about nothing because the opponent just doesn't hit another land. So let's just keep discarding him out. It's Collective Brutality time. And we see they've drawn another Desperate Ritual. So this time I go on the game 1 strategy and take away the Monomorphose. Now if they draw a Breeding Pool, they still don't do anything with their hand. And then we run out Hexdrinker, pass it back to the opponent. And the opponent scoops because they missed the land yet again. So, a free win for us in Game 2. We really earned the win in Game 1. Game 1 was insane. I think Game 1 we had to play really tight and had to see a few turns ahead to have a chance. Here in Game 2 we just had to, get lucky, and we did. So that was pretty awesome, not gonna lie. But it was still worth talking about those decisions, because many times you will be in a similar situation, and they will hit the second land, and then who knows. I don't think it's wrong for the opponent to keep a 1-lander with Opt necessarily. It's easy to look at this and say the opponent should have mulliganed, but look, this is the one axis on which we just inherently pressurize the opponent into making risky decisions, like keeping a 1-lander with 1 cantrip, because they don't want to mulligan against our attrition deck with all the discard, and then lure us on top of that as another second wave of threat and interaction. Buying back Bauble can dig us to more discard, or buying back Spellbomb can clear their graveyard a second time while cantripping. So the opponents really don't want to mulligan against us. That's exactly what we saw here. So there we go, guys. A pretty easy win here in Game 2 after a really intense win in Game 1. We take down Jegantha Storm, and we are 3-0 on the debut with Catrock. Hope you guys are enjoying this one, and I will see you for round 4. And we got a die roll going in our favor here in round number 4. And it is, wow, what a surprise. Can you believe another Lurrus Mirror? Can you honestly believe it? I don't know. First time for everything, right, guys? But anyway, we will Inquisition the opponent, and Inquisition will get met by a Force of Negation, which is most of the time great for us. Unless it's a combo deck, protecting an early combo, but when they pick Drown in the Loch, I'm a little less inclined to believe that to be the case. So, 2 for 1 for us right out of the gates. Opponent will go Watery Grave into Delver of Secrets, so we are against the Delver deck that has had new life breathed into it. And, again, against a fair deck, Inquisition becoming a 2-for-1 is very, very good. So, makes me wonder what's in their hand, but being on the play, having had a 2-for-1 go our way, I do decide to just run out the Tarmogoyf here, and also knowing that they play other threats besides Delver, and the odds that Delver won't flip are decent, and therefore we will also be playing defensively by playing the Tarmogoyf, which will break the Delver attacks. So that's the logic behind running out Goyf there, and it does pay off. But opponent has a Sprite Dragon, which is a new card. For those who don't know, this is very, very good in this deck. 2/2 Flying Haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter into Mishra's Bauble, which is just incredible. Well, it's a really good turn, too, and opponent will fire off the Bauble. I don't know why people fire off the Bauble on their turn against a discard deck. If we had discard as part of our plan this turn, it would give us more information to work with. But, sometimes it's just reducing the load of the opponent. As I say that, I then Bauble the opponent right back on our turn, but our incentives are different. We might have untapped mana going into the next turn. It all depends on what we see there. And I also don't think Delver decks usually play discard spells main decks, so the incentives do change. We attack with the Goyf. We are ahead on life total. We gotta respect the Sprite Dragon and the Delver itself for that matter, but I decide that we want a mana-efficient turn, and nothing we can do besides Lurrus into Bauble is mana-efficient. If we had a second green, like holding up a Skooz activation could be interesting. If we had a Fatal Push, I would definitely have just used 2 kill spells. But since we don't, I decided a little bit of a high risk, but definitely a high reward play of getting our 3-for-1, going Lurrus into Bauble. And Lurrus helps race plenty well, too, with the lifelink, right? So, and we know opponents drawing a Steam Vents for turn, because we Baubled them. So, first thing we're doing is making them have removal. Sadly, they do. They have a Lightning Bolt. They show us a land that we don't know about, and then it is Dragon and Delver time, putting us to 11. So we're going to Bauble them. We see another land on top, so we know the opponent is flooding a bit, and therefore I just go for the Thoughtseize here, seeing what the last card in their hand is. It is a little bit risky. I was a little bit wary about Fatal Push. Their attack definitely makes some sense with Fatal Push, but I reasoned there are many, many cards that could punish us for not Thoughtseizing, and unfortunately, despite seeing some extra cards here, we are still not having a double spell turn unless we Thoughtseize. So there is some, incentives going back and forth there, but I decided to Thoughtseize, and we're massively rewarded for it with taking the Archmage's Charm away. Then I took another a line that's pretty easy to justify, specifically because of our Bauble information. We know that they have a Spirebluff Canal coming off the top for turn. So we play out another Tarmogoyf, and yes, we're going to get hit pretty hard by the Sprite Dragon here, but we know that Delver won't flip, and we know that they're not drawing Lightning Bolt this turn, right? So they get to go Lurrus into Bauble, obviously. That's very, very good. They get to Bauble and then play the Canal. And then they hit us down to 5. So it is back over to us, and Mishra's Bauble is our draw for turn, which is awkward. We just kind of want another green land, and then we just win. But we don't have that, so then what do we do? Well, I'm going to begin by Baubling myself, and we see that there is a Fatal Push coming off the top. So that actually allows us to operate with impunity. We attack, and kind of no matter how they block, we get to do our thing here. And then we know that we are getting a push off the top. So one option here is to simply decay the Lurrus, and then we're going to draw the push, and we're going to push the Dragon. That was honestly probably the better option. I probably overthought this one, but I was like, I know that we're getting the push here. I know that if we decay the Dragon, they're going to use their Lurrus to buy it back. I haven't played this format enough since the new Ikoria came out, so I kind of hyped myself up into thinking, what other control cards do they have that are like 3 or 4 mana? They obviously have Archmage's Charm, which we wouldn't care about, but other, like, curve toppers like that, do we want to price them into going for the kill with Sprite Dragon rather than, like, casting a Damnation? That was my thought. Again, I probably overthought that. I probably should have just made them punish us for, like, being able to kill both of their things, right? But we gotta remember they're seeing a couple cards off of the Bauble. And we gotta remember that we have Fatal Push to prevent lethal anyway. Unless they draw, like, a Lightning Bolt. So, again, possible overthinking, but that was the logic there. And opponent will then Bauble, and then Thoughtseize us for information, and then Scoop. So Thoughtseize was the draw. I guess I stand corrected, they do play discard. Well, that just speaks to my point that I made a minute ago about how I'm not quite familiar with what is likely to be the supporting cast of spells in a deck like this, right? So, again, you understand the logic behind the way I sequenced there right at the end, but there is a lot to be said for not overthinking it, just like taking your kills, your clean kills, and making them have something that really punishes you for it, like a Damnation or whatever the case might be. I don't know if a deck like this plays Engineered Explosives either. That was another thing that was kind of on my radar, so I, again, was like, why don't we just give them the free buyback of Sprite Dragon, plan to push it, plan to survive the Lurrus attack, we'll have a clean kill on the crackback, even if they can remove one Tarmogoyf, whatever. Interesting spot, but maybe I would have sequenced differently if I had played against Delver a dozen times by now. In any case, we did well enough to get there. It was a narrow, tight, close game, and I gotta say, even though the Lurrus homogenation is not good, and even though this card is overpowered, and even though I kind of hate Lurrus mirrors in a way, I like that I'm seeing Burn, Storm, and Delver again. These are some classic, awesome, really fun to face modern decks, really fun to face when you're on BGX especially. I would rather play those decks a million times than play against, like, Bant once, or Big Mana once, or Gruul once. Like, to me, this is what Modern's all about. So, even though Lurrus is a disaster in many ways with how frequently he's seen in the format, hey, we're playing against some cool Lurrus decks anyway. But there we go. We win game 1. Let's take a look at game 2. Okay, guys, so sideboarding against Grixis Delver. There's a little room for nuance here, of course, but I think I sideboarded mostly how you want to be configured. 2 copies of Collective Brutality come in. This card has been an all-star in this league so far, and this is no exception. Brutality checking the hand is great. Brutality kills everything that moves, and the life drain is also relevant. So a true Swiss Army knife in the matchup. We want 2 copies of Veil of Summer as well, because they play Drown in the Lock we saw Thoughtseize, and there's probably other forms of permission or removal that Veil of Summer is just... Delver is such a mana-efficient deck, such a tempo-efficient deck. Veil of Summer obviously competes really well on tempo and is a 2-for-1. Just a disgusting card, as usual. So, 2 Brutality, 2 Veil. 1 copy of Nihil Spellbomb. Again, we're playing 2 but not 3. I think that's a fine place to be if you have a lot of other things to do against a Lurrus deck. And finally, 1 copy of Deadweight, which is, again, another card that's seeing a lot of matchups where it shines here. It's just good 1 mana removal. In terms of what comes out, cut 2 copies of Thoughtseize because, as you saw, our life total really matters. So even though discard is good, I'm kind of trading away 2 Thoughtseize for 2 Brutality, which is less painful, more flexible, and has a higher ceiling at the cost of course, being 1 mana more expensive. To a similar end, kind of like we did against Storm, but to a larger degree, we are paring away from our threats that are better on the play and are also more fragile. So 2 Bob and 2 Flayer come out, we are just getting more and more interactive, and our incentives might change for sideboarding on the play if they take us to game 3. But for this game here, game 2 on the draw, we are configured like that. I think it is pretty fine. Pretty fine if you ask me. And opponent will keep 7. And they will lead off on the namesake card, Delver of Secrets. But look at our opening hand, guys. I forgot to talk about the opener. Obviously, it's a bit of a risk with a 1-lander, but we have the draw, so we're seeing an extra card. We have Mishra's Bauble, so we're seeing another extra card. And we have push, Inquisition for 1 mana interaction, and then Abrupt Decay, Brutality at the 2-drop slot. We have Lurrus into Bauble all rolled up for the late game. This is a nut draw if we can hit our second land. So, we're going to Bauble the opponent, and we see they're about to draw Scalding Tarn. So, that is good to know about for a couple different reasons. It makes me want to Inquisition rather than push, because we know the Delver's not going to flip, and it means we're seeing an extra card in terms of having a fully informed Inquisition. So that's what I decided to do. We decided to Inquisition, and we see Drown in the Loch, which is going to be some good permission that we did just turn on with our Bauble and our Marsh Flats. And Opt and double Spire Dragon. So we have a handful of, or Sprite Dragon. We have a handful of removal. So I do just decide to take Drown in the Loch. Obviously, them on the play, you know, there is a consideration to take away one of the dragons, and I think it would have been relatively safe to do so. In fact, I might have done so if we had a second land guaranteed, because then we could go Brutality, take away the Drown in the Loch, all with our turn 2 play, but because we don't have the second land rolled up, that's not a guarantee. So I like taking away the Drown in the Loch. It's going to be a hard card to beat coming down the pipe, and that is the idea there. Finally, it leaves Opt in their hand, so we do have the Brutality 2-for-2 option if we draw a second land, and we do. So that's going to be the play. Peatland is a little awkward, just because if there's anything that's an issue, it's our life total. So to that end, Bob is our pitch here, and we do indeed 2-for-2, taking away the Opt, leaving them with an unflipped Delver, a third land, and a Sprite Dragon, and a Lurrus. So, you know, they still got a lot of gas, but so do we. So, back to the OP. Delver still not flipping. Delver, the card itself, looking pretty poor against us right now. Another way to put it is we're getting pretty lucky with the Delver flips. And Sprite Dragon, nothing. Seems like they had an uncastable card or a land in hand. And we draw the third land, so we're drawing out of our risky situation pretty well here. And I decided to be proactive, get a Goyf down. And in response to the Scalding Tarn, we are going to pick our spot where we're sure there's no permission, no Spell Pierce or anything like that, and push that dragon. Back to the opponent, and Delver at last becomes its true self, becomes who it was always meant to be, the insectile aberration off of a flipped Force of Negation, which is good to know about, but does not stop Abrupt Decay, and opponent's just going to pass holding up the Force. So it is back to us. It's Goyf time. It is Goyf time, and we bash in for 5, putting the opponent down here. The draw of Bob was pretty awkward, and I was feeling really strong here, so I just decided we're rolling out the Lurrus. We know one of the cards in their hand is a Force of Negation, which cannot stop Lurrus, so we're going to get proactive, but the opponent punishing us for this with, to some degree, with some additional body and a good proactive thing to do in the form of Snap Opt. But at least it's not like a lightning bolt, because the thing that I was thinking was a real risk there was them just having a bolt and then drawing another bolt and cheesing us out, or, you know, 2 forms of burn. But we get our 3-for-1 with Lurrus, and we're holding the Bauble here. And the opponent rips a Sprite Dragon off the top, which is a bit of a scary card, but also makes their Force even more awkward than it already was, and we see a Polluted Delta on top. They're probably going to shuffle that away, but we just want to draw multiple cards this turn with our Bauble. Looking for another land, and we got it, but it is a Peatland. So what do we do here? Well, it might be a little bit complicated if we didn't just have lethal on the field, because we have exactly 8. The opponent's only got 1 blocker. Boom, baby. Fatal push you. That's going to be that. So, I think the theme of this was player draw. We were rewarded, although we did dance on the edge of the knife a little bit, by being proactive, by saying, you know, we've got removal or a threat, I'm going to play the threat. We did that multiple times with Tarmogoyf across both games, and we did that near the end of the game here with Lurrus. Both games ended on turn 5. So you see, you don't have many turns in games like this. Obviously, the games would have gone longer if we had used removal over threats, but the point is, the margins are very tight, and it's a very skill-testing and interactive matchup. The important thing is to make sure you can justify your decision and try to weigh the pros and cons of both. I think in most cases that I did play a threat, you could make a successful argument for holding up or just main phasing removal instead. But the proactivity was rewarded here. The power of early Tarmogoyf, just closing out the game before the opponent can really get their Lurrus online either time. Yeah, that was where it's at. So, good games, well played, and what a wonderful debut for Catrock. We are 4-0, my friends. Let's see what happens in round 5. We've been drawn really hot so far, my friends. We've had great opening hands. We haven't had to mulligan. The only potential risks are a couple one-landers we've kept near the end, but the one-landers have triple 1-mana action plus a Bauble for the added look, so these are some pretty good one-land keeps, if you ask me, as far as one-land keeps go. And we are against, the 4th Lurrus Mirror of the league, right? It's been all Lurrus Mirrors besides Storm. So, yeah, that tells you everything you need to know. So we're going to Bauble the opponent. We see Rogran Triome, which is the Jeskai Tri-land, and we see some Jeskai control cards in the opponent's hand. So they're a Jeskai deck with Lurrus, or a 4-color pile with Lurrus. We see Lightning Helix, Monoleak, Path to Exile. So what do we do? Well, I went for the Lightning Helix, because Lightning Helix is going to kill either of our threats very efficiently, and the ramp from Path to Exile is something we actively want, at least until we start flooding or until we hit our lands naturally. We can Thoughtseize away the Monoleak next turn, and then the idea, of course, is to deploy a threat that they have to path. So opponent will play the Triome, and we have drawn our second land off of the Bauble, and we've also drawn a Thoughtseize, so very, very interesting here. And we could go a couple of different directions, but I did decide to run out the Flayer. I think if this is a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for the opponent, if they want to path us, they are ramping us, which we haven't drawn the third land, so we need. And if they don't, we get the trigger, and we also get to follow up with a couple Thoughtseizes. So opponent's letting it resolve, and we see 3 lands on top. So what I decided to do here is bin 2 of the lands and then leave Treetop Village on top. This is a land that I'm fine with drawing if they decide not to path us, but if they path us after the fact, I'm fine shuffling it away. We get the third land anyway, and we get an important utility land back in our deck. You could have also done the same with Swamp, just to play around them taxing our basics. I think it should be one or the other. I opted for Treetop Village there. And then we are going to follow up with a second main phase Thoughtseize, which is going to get the path out of their hand. So, again, mission accomplished, basically. Path resolves, we take away the Monoleak, and we see just a bunch of lands in hand. Pretty cool. The only regret is that our second Thoughtseize is not live this turn, so we don't have quite as mana-efficient of a turn as we would like, but we're still in a really good spot. Unfortunately, we've drawn a pile of removal. We've been drawing like pushes and trophies. That's kind of the wrong half of the deck here. So here, rather than checking with a Thoughtseize potentially whiffing, I'm just going to go Lurrus, make them have something. They really have to have something here. We're going to run away with the game. And opponent has found Icefang Quattle, which is very annoying. It's like the best card that most decks that play it have against us, or certainly one of them. With some fetch lands being represented, we don't bother with the Bauble yet. Mystic Sanctuary. I mean, can you believe this? It's a 4-color nonsense deck supporting Mystic Sanctuary. I hate it. I hate it. I hate these piles. I hate how greedy they are and how correct they are to be greedy. That's the real thing. It's like the antithesis of a 2-color rock deck, right? Opponent finding another Quattle is pretty rough. And then they found another Path to Exile off the Quattle for our Lurrus, so that's really what they needed to do. They do it. Feels bad, man, feels bad. And we think we still know their entire hand. I did at the time anyway, I might not have been tracking it perfectly here, but that makes the draw of a Thoughtseize pretty bad. They could be better in the later turns, but right now we're kind of breaking at a point where we were ahead. But we're falling behind. Opponent attacking with both Quattles here. And then they're going to run out a Scalding Tarn, and they are going to say go. And so if we wanted to play around them having another Mystic Sanctuary, I guess they probably played the Sanctuary from hand, right? Let's say they did. So if we're going to play around another Mystic Sanctuary, we would of course just untap with Scavenging Ooze. But I'm living in hope that we're going to draw proactive things to do with our mana. And I also just want to be efficient this turn. So we are either eating something with Scooze or pushing. I went for the push, and this is going to help us race. Our life total is getting pretty low. It is exposing us to another Mystic Sanctuary, but my reasoning here is that we will at least have a turn of eating the graveyard with Scooze, because they'll just put this on top, right? So we'll at least get to untap with Scooze. So that was the thinking there, but opponent, sure enough, has another Sanctuary putting Path to Exile on top, and then we get ridiculously punished because they have drawn the third Quattle of the top 16 cards, and then they get to Path us before we even get to have a good turn of Scoozing. So feels real bad, man. Max punished for, trying to be mana efficient. And we're just drawing not much. We've got a handful of stuff that's not great. We play out the Goyf. I think, again, we know both the cards in their hand are lands, but the problem is they have Lurrus, and they also have Quattles, and all that stuff's really good against us. So they go with the Lurrus. They play a Quattle from the graveyard. Yep. So again, their third Quattle finding them the path immediately, really a disaster for us. We trophy the Lurrus at the first available opportunity when we know they don't have any permission in hand or anything else. But we're still staring down triple Quattle, which is, again, kind of the best card against us. So we just have to try to batter through these, like giving them a bunch of 3-for-1s, but we're trophying their cantripping threats. We've got some Thoughtseizes, mostly rotting in hand, but they do have one unknown in hand now. So I do go for it, and we get a Wrenn and 6 out of the hand. Okay, so it is a 4-color greed pile, but Wrenn and 6, another thing that facilitates it alongside, presumably Astrolabe, although we haven't seen it yet. We decay a Quattle. We put them to 7. Opponent will play Field of Ruin. They will say go. Back to us. We have drawn Inquisition. This is why it's rough playing against these blue decks, because discard is necessary, but it's a necessary evil, because all their top decks that are spells are pretty much value positive, or at least proactive, whereas discard has a high whiff rate. I guess permission would be their corollary to that, so maybe they do have their downfalls as well. But both players play in draw go here, and now it's our turn to draw, and we've hit Fatal Push, and the client's starting to slow down, so you'll be hearing me click a lot. Sorry about that. Might have to actually hit play here. But I think what we're doing here is going to clear the way with an Inquisition for the Fatal Push. So we Inquisition, they've drawn Archmage's Charm, so they respond by drawing 2, and then they have found their 4th Quattle of the game in the top less than half of their deck, and the Quattle finds them Snapcaster Mage, the Snapcaster is going to get Path to Exile, and then our Inquisition resolves, and we get to take a Lightning Helix. Let's just impress upon ourselves how nutty that turn was. Then, after the fact, this is interesting, opponent just allows us to attack with the Goyf and actually takes a trade with Quattle. I think that's amazing for us. I think that's one of the only things that gives us a shot here, because, again, the Goyf was just getting pathed. Now, you kind of understand why they did so, because they wanted to play around us deploying another follow-up threat, but that was a free piece of value for us. It just kind of turned their Snapcaster Mage into a 2-1. The path didn't end up mattering. And then, while we know they don't have permission, we push the other Quattle. So all we have to do is beat a Snapcaster Mage and their top decks, which, granted, they top deck really well, but if there's one thing our deck can beat, it's a 2-1. We have a pile of removal that's otherwise not great, but would be good in this spot, and every one of our threats is going to stonewall it and outclass it. But it is a little high risk, high reward, because if we totally brick, Snapcaster will end the game more quickly than the 1-1 would. However, my reasoning there was that if we brick, we are not going to win anyway. So, again, I'm going to put my faith in our deck to beat a 2-1, despite the fact that we're starting at 6 life. But so far, so bad. We draw another land. So the bricking continues, and the client lag also continues. So I'm just kind of hitting play, and I'm going to try to commentate as it comes up here. Or maybe I have to hit next turn. So back to the opponent. I guess we'll just hit next turn. And they're putting us to 2. And then it is back to us on the upkeep. the opponent will Lightning Helix us. So opponent just never ever really stopped gassing out. They did draw a lot of lands, to be fair, but some of their lands, especially the ones that became Mystic Sanctuary, were just so good. We bricked harder than they did. It was still pretty close, but we cannot beat 4 Quattles. It was actually 5 Quattles because they got to buy one back with Lurrus under most circumstances. You know, somebody told me in a recent video Plague Engineer is not good against Bant. I disagree. I think a BG deck is gonna really struggle to beat Icefang Quattle in any capacity unless you are trading with it at parity. And unless you have, like, Liliana the Last Hopes in your deck, Plague Engineer is one of the best ways to do that. Obviously, we don't have access to Plague Man here, but I thought I'd toss that in here. And, you know, I don't think... Obviously, a lot of situations in that matchup, Plague Engineer is underwhelming. If you play like 3 or 4 in your sideboard, maybe you don't bring them all in, but I think certainly bringing in 1 or 2 is correct against any Icefang Quattle deck that I can think of, because it's just, you saw how that card just completely buried us here. Anyway, that is a rant, that is a tangent. We lose game 1 in a pretty annoying way here to one of these 4-color piles, but we're a grindy pile too. We are still a Lurrus deck. We can still take him down. Let's see what we can do game 2. Alright guys, sideboarding here is a little bit edgy again. I actually found myself cutting a Thoughtseize here. It's definitely not obvious, but I don't want too many dead top decks, so I'm leaving in 5 discard spells on the play, 5 targeted discard. It's especially okay, I think, because we're bringing in both of our Collective Brutalities, yet again, Brutality like the MVP of this league, and we are also, once again, just kind of cutting a Confidant and 2 Flayers. These cards are totally fine, but we do need to trim around the edges somewhere. We're bringing in all of our Nihil Spellbombs and all of our Veils of Summer, so we also trim some Assassin's Trophies. These cards overall are pretty fine. I leave in 1 trophy just as a way to, as a catch-all answer that we don't really want to use until the late game. So a bit of hedged sideboarding that you could make a couple different choices with, but I think, again, we're on the right track here. And we open on a hand with awkward lands, but everything else about it is really nutty. We are seeing some very, very strong opening hands, and the opponent mulligans down to 6 for us, which is pretty good stuff. So we open on the Peatland, and we see 2 snow-covered islands, a Flooded Strand, Arkham's Astrolabe, Tormod's Crypt, Wrenn, and 6. A very easy take of Astrolabe here, because not only can they not cast the Wrenn off of their current mana, we can also just Inquisition away the Wrenn next turn anyway. So, easy take of Astrolabe. Tormod's Crypt is kind of annoying, but it's value negative unless it's being looped by Lurrus, right? We've drawn Nihil Spellbomb, so we've got some Grave Hate of our own coming down the pipe. Oh boy. Client, you can't lag on us in the control matchup. This is the worst one to lag for. So, we Inquisition, we see they've drawn a Cryptic Command. So, obviously, Wrenn and 6 are only legal take. Back to the opponent here. They're going to go Island, pass having fetched up the Tri-Land, and then we just cannot hit our 3rd land, so we've got a lot of stuff to like here, but we can't hit the 3rd land. I'm sorry, guys, I've got to start hitting next turn here, but we're going to take a risk. We're going a turn without Inquisitioning or Thoughtseizing, a turn Shields down with Veil of Summer just to take some actions, just to get some cards down. I think on the play we can afford to do this. I guess I'm just hitting next turn for every turn from here on out. Opponent will draw and play a Field of Ruin. That was a really interesting play. So it does fix their mana, so I get why they would do that, but it also kind of fixes our mana, especially because they hit Treetop Village. If we are land screwed on only 2 lands, I would rather have 2 black than 2 green. And it let us have a more mana-efficient turn if we wanted to with Nihil Spellbomb, which I did. So we're seeing 2 extra cards. Sadly, my friends, we still cannot hit the 3rd land, so it's just going Hexdrinker mode. We draw Fatal Push. We'll Inquisition away the Cryptic Command. We see their hand is Land Snapcaster Mage. And we put a level on Hexdrinker, because we're not holding up Veil of Summer this turn. Again, we just want to be mana efficient. So, back over to us. Fatal Push, again, kind of bad in this spot, but you'll note that I did leave them in as a way to try to batter through the Quattles and the other lower curve stuff, and you also have to have a non-zero amount of answers to Lurrus of the Dream Den as well. Let's see if hitting play is the happy medium here. For non-complying client. So opponent priced into just flashing in the Snapcaster as a prospective blocker. We just Fatal Push, and then we just, again, level up the Hexdrinker here. When you don't draw lands, you have to take risks and go shields down, but so far it has paid off. So now we are at the point where we can put the third level onto Hexdrinker, and we're going to go ahead and try to do that main phase. So that's the play. Opponent lets it resolve. And then now we've got a much scarier threat. So the snake doing some work, going over to the opponent, and we're just passing, holding up push, holding up veil. It's draw, go, and we got the snake bashing in. We're drawing some decent stuff, but again, no other lands, so we simply can't really do much besides put one level on if we want to, and we decide we want to. Opponent goes for an end-step Cryptic tempo play on our land. We blow it out with a 1-mana Cryptic with our Veil of Summer, and then opponent scoops it up. So that was a feel-good moment, my friends. How often can you beat a control deck without drawing a third land? But Hexdrinker, plus being on the play, plus some early discard spells, plus I think some well-timed decisions on when to put a level on Hexdrinker and when not to, plus the disgusting ceiling of Veil of Summer as a 1-mana Cryptic against a 4-mana Cryptic, and the opponent failing to find a way to deal with this threat. A lot of things went our way, so that was a great way to win Game 2. We're right in the mix, guys. If we win Game 3, we are 5-0 on the debut. Let's see what happens. This is for all the marbles, folks, and I did side out a Tarmogoyf on the draw. I considered siding even further away from Goyf, but I think the pressure of Goyf is still a pretty good way to win this game. We've got kind of an underwhelming 7, but I don't want to mulligan in the matchup. I think this is a fine keep. Opponent keeping 7 as well. And opening on Fetchland and Bauble. So, oh, client, come on. Okay, I'm going to try to commentate while hitting play. Okay, here we go. Question mark? All right, we might have to... Okay, here we go. I was going to say we might have to use the next turn function. We still might. So I baubled myself and saw a swamp on top. Very, very happy to shuffle away the swamp. And then, of course, we're running out the Spellbomb to have something to do. On turn 1 here, opponent will go get a different Triome, play a land, and pass. And we have drawn 2 Inquisitions. Seems pretty decent to me. So we Inquisition... Number 1, opponent will flash in Quattle, our old nemesis, our favorite card, right? And then we see quite a scary hand. But they don't have white mana, I guess is what they lack. So right now the Lightning Helix is not live, but it's still a card we could at least consider taking. But they've been slow rolling a Mishra's Bauble because they don't necessarily need to expose it yet. And then they have Snapcaster Mage. I guess a Renin 6 is not castable at the moment either, right? So that was actually a really interesting spot. I did decide to take the Renin 6 because it is just very value-oriented, and we always obviously have this other Inquisition to follow up. So what I end up opting for is just taking away both of their things with X1 potential, leaving them with a Bauble, which is a 1-for-1, leaving aside the Lurrus loop, a Helix, which is a 1-for-1, and a land, which we cannot take. So, opponent will begin by bobbling us. Note also that they cannot cast Lurrus off of this mana. I didn't explain that decision as thoroughly as I should have because I was distracted by my client not quite complying, but a big factor in what we took and did not take is their mana. Again, they can't cast Helix now, they can't cast Lurrus. They couldn't really cast much, which might have been an incentive to take Bauble, actually, but I couldn't bring myself to do it with X-for-1s like Snap and Ren sitting in hand. So, back over to us, we have drawn Thoughtseize. Oh, this client's going to be the death of me, guys. I apologize. This is, again, the worst matchup for the client to be non-responsive for, so I'm just going to kind of have to show you what we did and react to the client if and when it complies rather than be able to control the pace myself. But we'll begin with a Thoughtseize. We know they had at least the Helix to take. We see that they've also found Archmage's Charm, Snapcaster Mage. Kind of a no-win situation there. I take the thing that I think has the highest ceiling at this point. Remember, we do have a Spellbomb, so the Snapcaster might not be ideally positioned. And then we play a 6-7 Goyf, and we're going to say go. Opponent will field us here on the end step. We'll get a swamp so we can hold up our Spellbomb cantrip, and we're also holding up Fatal Push, but they don't know about that. They play a land, they're going to say go. So here on the end step, we're going for the Fatal Push. It resolves. Coast is clear with Goyf. Let's get to beating. Let's get to beating. All right, and we get there. So then we play out an untapped land, and then we play Lurrus, and the opponent will respond with Tormod's Crypt, rendering Lurrus a little bit obsolete here. So what we could do is Spellbomb the opponent, but then the opponent, having still had this Lightning Helix in hand and having found their white land, could respond. We couldn't buy it back. So I did decide we were kind of in a no-win situation there. They're like they do here, they're probably going to Helix the Lurrus almost either way. So I decided just forcing action there is in our best interest, because we have the Tarmogoyf, they don't. We still have a Spellbomb that we can hold up for competing over their Lurrus, and I think that they out-top deck us on average. So ending the game sooner rather than later is in our best interest. And this also takes away the prospect of like Helix, Snap Helix, at some point in the near future to kill the Tarmogoyf, right? So they do go for the Lurrus. We are priced into the Spellbomb in response, of course, and sadly we draw another Blooming Marsh and a Thoughtseize. So, we are in a position where we can totally out-top deck the opponent. These have been our three draws. Blooming Marsh, Thoughtseize. If we had found even one kill spell for Lurrus, even one really good threat like Scavenging Ooze would be right here, it would be a much different story. Instead, we just Thoughtseize to force the Snapcaster out before they can get value off of him, and to grow the Goyf, and we just have to say go. We just have to say go. The good news is the opponent's totally hellbent. They're totally hellbent, so it is just a top deck war. Obviously, a lot of their things off of Lurrus are good, but they have to find something first. What do they find? They immediately find a draw 2 with Archmage's Charm, and then they find an Arkham's Astrolabe off of that, so all at once they're seeing like 4 cards, their mono woes are totally behind them, and it's back to us. We draw another land in the form of Peatland, we crack it, and we find another land with Blooming Marsh, and we cannot afford to attack, because they've got a 2-turn clock, and then they go Mystic Sanctuary, buy back the draw 2, cast the draw 2. You can see why I'm hitting play now, and it's not just because the client sucks. It's because the opponent is like top decking to the point of no return, and we are doing the opposite. We are only drawing bricks, basically. Inquisition is a card, but not when you've got only lands to follow it up with. Like, clearing away for a really good threat with Inquisition would be fine, but that's not what we've got. So opponent flashes in a Quattle. Oh, you just hate to see it, my friends. You really do hate to see it. Then they've got Engineered Explosives. We might as well sign a block here, but then EE's clearing away our Goyf, and then they've got another Quattle. Those things have never been far away. Nihil Spellbomb. That is actually a good draw. That's one of the few things that could potentially keep us in this game. So, we Inquisition, we get Celestial Purge out of their hand. Okay, so Inquisition live. Then we play Spellbomb, but look at this, opponent with another Mystic Sanctuary. What a card, right? What a time to be alive with Mystic Sanctuary in Modern, a tutor on a fetch land, and our cantrip off of Spellbomb just finds us the millionth land. Back to the opponent, here's another draw 2, there's another Tormod's Crypt, they're looping the Crypt, they're putting us to 4, we draw Abrupt Decay. Let's try to decay the Lurrus. What do you think's going to happen? Veil of freaking Summer, and that's the concession from me. Wow. So for all the power of our deck, for how well it looked, for how well it curved out, for how strong it looked, for how well positioned it looked, that last game was a nightmare. We had a lot of little things go against us, but we still put them into top deck mode. And yeah, we were in top deck mode too. They had the Lurrus, but that was, again, after a lot of little things didn't go our way. We still had every chance of winning. Post side, we've still got a lot of removal for Lurrus, we've still got a lot of Haymakers, and we play Veil of Summer too. But while we drew, I guess, 4 lands and 2 discard spells, and admittedly 1 Spellbomb that was decent, opponent started off with ripping Archmage's Charm into Astrolabe, into Snapcaster Mage, into Quattle, into everything else that culminated in looping the Archmage's Charm a few times and just blowing us out at the very end with Veil of Summer. It couldn't end on a worse note, and guys, I gotta tell you, Lurrus is amazing, but it is a little bit worse, I think, overall against decks like this. Even though Lurrus himself is awesome on our side, the lack of Plague Engineer, the lack of Choke, the lack of Boil if you're Jund, the lack of Ashiok sometimes, depending on the opponent's build, these are big, big misses. You know, when you're trying to beat a control deck and all of your permanents are CMC 2 or less, I don't care how much value you can generate off of them. Oftentimes your card quality is not quite high enough. But anyway, we took them right to the ropes, and they needed to have, frankly, better luck than us at the end. Now, granted, maybe they on average out top deck us, but we were probably like 45-55 to win from where we were, and we just got crushed. So we lose right at the finish line, but what a great debut for Catrock. Well, there you go, my friends. I truly hope you enjoyed this replay. It was a really fun league, and boy oh boy does our deck look strong. I think BG the Rock Golgari is a great, great shell for Lurrus of the Dream Den. One of the best, I dare say, but that 4-color Lurrus pile is very annoying. Seems like a bad matchup, but, you know, we do have the tools to beat it, and we can beat up on Burn pretty well. We can compete with most of the meta, and we are hedged against other things as well with, you know, Damping Sphere for big mana and combo. Things like this. We have a lot to like, so there we go, guys. I already made the major point right at the end of that league that I wanted to make during the wrap-up, which is that we are softer to the blue value-based decks on Lurrus, despite Lurrus's insane value. The lack of the impactful 3 mana permanents that usually carry us in those matchups is sorely felt. So whether you want to consider playing some chokes and non-bow a little bit with Lurrus, maybe move Lurrus into the main deck, I don't know. That requires more testing, but in any case, that was our league. It was a 4-1 where we got right up to the finish line and then just got out top decked. So great times, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you once again to Alex Gray, David Cordova, Sal Malacola, and Gold Sabertooth, the former for being a brand new Confidant, and the latter trio for being Confidants who have ascended the rank to the tier of Tireless. I truly appreciate you, my friends, and I truly appreciate all Patreon supporters, and I appreciate the viewers too. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to the channel. I don't know what we're going to play next, but you can be sure, well, pretty sure that it will be something BGX, but it might be something different. I do play other archetypes from time to time. Mono Red Prowess is out there too, but it feels a little poorly positioned to me. I'll come back to that after Companion meta has gone, right? And maybe after Uro meta has somehow gone too. Anyway, guys, thank you once again for watching. I hope you are all being well, staying safe out there, and let me know in the comments what you think about the Rock, Catrock to be exact. I look forward to talking to you there, and I look forward to seeing you for the next video. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful night, and I will talk to you soon.